Good evening. I'm Malcolm Young, and I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. Welcome to the Forum, and thanks for joining us online. My guest tonight is one of the most important songwriters of his generation. A pioneering guitarist, he has released 35 albums spanning 5 decades, which have sold over 11 million copies worldwide. He has won 13 Juno Awards, the Canadian Grammys, and has been nominated a remarkable 33 times. He's an officer of the Order of Canada and a member of the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame. A longtime activist, his life and music have been shaped by politics, protest, and spiritual discovery, which he writes about compellingly and thoughtfully in his autobiography, Rumors of Glory. Each year, the Cathedral chooses a theme for inspiration and reflection, and in 2022, our theme is connection. Tonight, we'll be talking about the connections between taking action, faith, and music. Bruce, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
I'm so glad that you joined us. Being on tour already, kind of taking time for us, I especially appreciate it because I can imagine how exhausting it must be to go to all these different places.
Well, I mean, the timing is good because there's a break in the tour right now, so I'm off, for a few weeks and back out again around the Easter weekend. I guess we start up again. But yeah, I mean, it's. I don't find touring to be that exhausting, honestly. Yeah. It feels like home. The tour bus feels more like home than any place else I've ever been.
Yeah, right. It's the continuing factor through your whole life. So you may have had different apartments and houses, but you've had one tour bus. It kind of set up,
Well, literally speaking, it hasn't been one tour bus, but they're all the same.
Yeah, exactly.
So and it's the function. It's that nomadic thing that feels natural to me.
What have you noticed about just people after COVID? Like, how have we changed, and how does it feel different to be doing a concert?
What I've noticed in the shows we've been doing is that people are very excited to be out and in each other's company. It's like a lot of smiling going on. Yeah. Even I don't think it would matter who was on stage. It's just like, look at us, we're here, and I feel that way too. I mean, we're all sharing this space, and we haven't done it for a long time. So there's a lot of enthusiasm out there for that. Of course, in the broader picture, we also see all sorts of psychosis and rage and everything else too, right?
Exactly.
So, I'm not seeing that at the shows, mercifully.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm almost every week I see someone and I say, I haven't seen you in 2 years, and it's like a kind of like a reunion every week. So I'm really grateful to see people too. We still are wearing masks in church, and I can't really see how people are taking the sermon so well.
It's like that with the audiences, although I mean, because the shows are usually at night and the room is dark, except for me. I don't generally rely on seeing people's faces anyway, but when I do see them, it is odd to look out and see just a whole bunch of bandits.
Yeah, completely. And I don't know as clearly whether I'm being boring or not, because that's like the sign.
Yeah, right.
They're all giving a bunch of signs.
You can't tell us they're yawning.
Completely. Oh, I love that too. It's just like finally I can yawn in public and no one knows. In your autobiography, you talk about so many great songs, and you've brought to the world so much great music. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just a piece of music that you were involved in the creation of, that you're especially proud of, or you think is especially important?
It's hard to assign any
it's like your babies, right?
Well,
like do you like your son more?
That's one aspect of it. It's hard to pick favorites because I'm attached to all of them in varying degrees and different ways. But beyond that, it's hard to assign any particular importance to anything I've done. I mean, I recognize that I have an audience, and I'm grateful for that, and et cetera. But the way people respond to songs is personal. So what's important to me might not be important to someone else. What's vitally important to some people. I mean, people who've reported to me like profound effects from one song or another. I mean, they're not certainly not effects that I planned on, nor necessarily songs that I would have expected that from. So it's really hard to sort of say, well, this one's important. I mean, if you ask a music business person, they'll tell you the important ones are the ones that got airplay, right? Yes. So if I had a rocket launcher, Love is in a Dangerous Time.
Yeah.
Last Night of the World, various songs that got on the radio, but
yeah,
for
that
me,
Lovers in a Dangerous Time, we had a member of my congregation who just, it meant so much, it meant the world to him. I mean, that open to the thrust of grace line, it's like, it's
was a
with
pretty
him
good one,
every,
wasn't it? Yeah.
it's with him every week of the year. You know?
But it's the state we want to be in, and it just, once in a while, that sort of truth comes through. I don't feel like I did it particularly. I mean, it's like it comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm a vehicle for it, and I'm happy to be that. But it's like, whose line is that really? I don't know. But
Yeah.
it's a fact, and some of us recognize the value of that, and others of us don't. And so it's nice to hear that it means that much to your parishioner.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's the songs are like. I mean, they're all. Each one is distinct in my mind, at least. They, from somebody else's point of view, maybe they run together or they form a, an identifiable body of work or something that's associated with their picture of me. But for me, they're all intensely individual,
Yeah.
and so some songs are silly and reflect a kind of playfulness, and other songs I think are serious. I mean, and I haven't thought this way for quite a while, but I remember in the first decade or so that I was doing this, there were certain songs that seemed to me like big songs with a capital B.
Yeah.
Gavin's Woodpile would be one of
Oh,
those.
yeah, right.
Dialogue with the Devil would be one of those. They were generally the songs with a spiritual element to them that kind of tried to go deeper than is often the case with songs. I mean, songs, poetry, sometimes you get at depth by painting a picture of the surface of things. Other times you got to dig in there, and I don't think there's more merit to one way than the other. I think having substance is important. No substance is kind of not really worthwhile, but the substance can come in different ways and forms and by different means. So
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have this sense of there's times when I'm just preaching too much, I mean, and there's a part of me that's kind of afraid that nothing's going to happen or nothing's going to come, and I do have this sense of something coming from somewhere else for sure. But I mean, there's what I need to do is I need to sit at the desk, reading commentaries or reading books, theologians, etc., and something happens. And so I do have that feeling of something, being a conduit for something. But I wonder what you do in order to just help, those things that are so important to people come to you,
I do a lot of waiting.
Yeah, yeah.
Mostly it's that. I try to maintain a receptive state, but that's kind of luck of the draw.
Yeah,
On any given day. I mean, how receptive was I, in the lift ride down here, or how, I don't know. I mean, I had a good conversation with a Jamaican driver, but it's not something I find I can predict at all. But it is necessary to. It's probably necessary whether you're doing anything creative or not. I mean, but to try to just be in a receptive state of mind.
Yeah.
Receptive to the universe, to the divine, to the promptings that come from wherever they come from.
Right. Yeah. That I mean, the subconscious, where we're taking in so much more than we're consciously aware of from each other. Which was why I'm so glad that we met. You came to be together in person, because there's so much more that we're communicating that's hard to get off of a screen.
Yeah. I mean, the screen is great. I mean, compared to, for instance, I've talked about this doing radio interviews, and a lot of the radio interviews will happen with Zoom now.
Oh, yeah.
Even though it's only the radio, right? But they want to have a visual record of what was done as well. And it's so much nicer because you can see the face of the person you're talking to, and they're almost always people I don't know. Once in a while, that's somebody that I've talked to a few times before, but it's just kind of it's great, but it's limited because it is a flat screen, and it's just better than only hearing a voice.
Yeah, yeah.
This is much better still.
Yeah, every step it makes it, there's more that's conveyed.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder if you can talk just about some of the people who are important teachers for you. I mean, and just what you got from them, and it's a broad question. You know, you could answer it in political terms, and spiritual terms, and musical terms.
You know, I mean, there's so many. It's hard to know where to start. But in a way, what immediately comes to mind is the poetry of T.S. Eliot.
Oh yeah.
Which I discovered in, we didn't call it middle school back then, but in what would have been middle school, and when I first understood that poetry didn't have to be a rhyming story, like the highwayman came riding, that kind of stuff. Yes. I mean, that was okay, but it wasn't that interesting to me. But when I discovered what the poetry that I came to love, it was more modern stuff, and more abstract, and more challenging in a way, and evocative. And I guess that evocation of feeling and the triggers that it provided to the imagination was, and T.S. Eliot's just an example of it, but he was one of the most important ones. Dylan Thomas, the people we studied in school, but the poems that we didn't study were the big ones, and I was just captured by that. So that comes to mind right away. C.S. Lewis, I read a lot of C.S. Lewis, but I also read a ton of science fiction, and that really shaped my imagination in a way too, as a teenager.
Right. Yeah, and I can hear it in the lyrics of your early music. It has that valence. It makes its appearance in your music.
It does. It still does. I mean, and the Beat Generation, those Ginsberg in particular, and Kerouac and William Burroughs. After a while, I mean, I'm hesitant to think of William Burroughs as a teacher exactly, but certainly he was. Well, he was, though, because he challenged everything.
Yeah.
He wrote stuff that people would still have difficulty with in many circles, and that was exemplary in some way.
Yeah.
Just the fact that you could push the boundaries the way he did and get away with it, and still have it be good and interesting. So, I guess all of those things. Those are early influences, and now it's, I do dream work with a guy named Mark Bregman who lives in Santa Fe, and we do this kind of Jungian based, but it's not really, he's taken it somewhere else. It's more about God than Jungian stuff, but I do that. So he's a teacher for me. Jeff Garner, who's the pastor at San Francisco Lighthouse Church, where I go online because I haven't been back in the flesh for a couple of years, but he's a friend and someone whose take on Scripture and the faith in general I find really valuable. So it's all over the place really. But everybody that I've ever encountered really that for long enough to kind of have a real exchange has been a teacher of some kind too.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I was thinking about T.S. Eliot. I basically learned how to be a priest in his church. So the church that he went to when he was in Cambridge, it was Anglo-Catholic church. Incense. It was a very high church experience, and it's funny because in a way, part of the way he dealt with modern life was like through rituals. The rituals that kind of take us out of the logical, rational part of ourselves and kind of connect us to that spirit that you were talking about earlier. As you were talking about it, I was wondering just what rituals are there around your life and just around the music life too? Are there rituals that are part of performance that help people who are there with you to get to a new place?
For me, a typical day on tour is kind of all ritual. Not in a formal sense. I mean, you know, I don't invite people to do anything in particular except listen, but I have my little ritual that I engage in to get ready for the show. We do an extended sound check, and then I get myself ready, and just a lot of mundane little details and so on. But it's always the same, or at least it's consistent. And then I get on stage, and whatever happens, happens. But it's the whole thing has the feel of a ritual.
Yeah, yeah, and it does.
I hadn't thought about that until you asked the question, actually, but it really does.
It does, and it does kind of prepare people for a kind of experience of transcendence, an experience that kind of takes them out of where they are.
We could wish. I mean, transcendence is, may it be so, you know. I mean, I experienced that in a limited way, at least. I don't feel like I'm completely transported to some other place, but I do feel like when it all works right, that there's how to articulate this, but it's as if the physical space has expanded to infinity, even though it is what it is. It's still a dark room full of people and, you know, and the music, but the combination of the elements that are there, sort of focused around the music, has the capacity to create this kind of bigger universe. And I don't know if other people feel that or not, and I don't feel it all the time. I mean, when everything works right, that happens.
Yeah, I sometimes in prayer feel that exact feeling. Like it's almost like I go to a place that's inner, but it seems so much vaster than the experience that's out of me. I just don't even know how to describe it, but it sounds like what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's something. It's like, but not exactly like the sense of ecstasy you get looking at the night sky, or and feeling like you're part of this enormous universe in a loving way. Like there's, I mean, you don't always feel that. Sometimes you just stand under in the night sky and you look up and you're just cold.
Yeah.
But other times, you're in touch with something huge, and you know, at those moments, it can come through the music, or it can come through other kinds of experiences too. But
yeah, last night we have yoga practice on Tuesday nights, and we before COVID we had 600 people coming to it. I mean, so you're not only in the presence of this incredible Gothic cathedral with the stained glass windows filtering through the stained glass windows, but to see that many people doing the same thing, like the same motion, whatever it is, there's something very powerful about it. But Gary, the musician last night, was telling me just how he was just really in the flow of it. And flow is a great word for it. And he was talking about just like being able to kind of leave your ego on the outside and just like not be so worried about just like being judged or criticized or, you know, being great or anything like that. But that was exactly what he was describing, was that performing in a place in a way that helps draw people into something bigger.
The other night we had a couple of friends over for dinner from out of town, different people who didn't know each other. Les Stroud, who some people know as Survivor Man, and my friend Jenny Scheinman, who's a brilliant violinist, and the three of us sat around and played music.
Yeah.
And that happened then. You know, just, I mean, there was some whiskey involved as well, but and a good dinner and everything, but you know, we were able to just share this stuff, and you can feel kind of the energy is spiraling upward and outward from some invisible center to include us all.
Yeah.
You know,
My wife's native Hawaiian, and so we during the summers we'd be at the beach, you know, surf until we're just absolutely exhausted, and then have lunch, and then we play the ukulele and sing together. And yeah, I mean, from our kids' like earliest memories, there is that sense of just like, oh, everything's coming together. We're all, you know, there's an energy there. I wonder, but just like with your daughters, like how did you introduce them to music, and like how are they connected to music? Is it just something that their dad does, or you just it may not be part of your like family life?
Well, you know, the two daughters are quite different from each other.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, they live miles,
Yeah.
You know, a couple of thousand miles apart for one thing, but my older daughter is in her 40s, and my younger daughter is 10.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a pretty big difference. And plus, I'm around for my younger daughter, and my older daughter's mom and I split up when she was only 3.5.
Yeah.
So I became the every second weekend dad, and that's quite a different experience from being full-time.
Yeah.
So my awareness of their processes is different accordingly.
Yes, right.
But Jen, the older daughter, she's a big fan of music. She can sing, actually. One time there was a period in Montreal where I was living in a house that had a separate apartment in the basement, and for a brief period, Jen was living down there. And one day I was doing dishes, and I could hear this singing wafting up, and who's that? I asked her, who, did you have somebody over? And because I heard this great singing coming up, it was her,
Yeah,
as it turned out. But she's an anthropologist. She doesn't, you know, she doesn't do music for a living.
Yeah.
And my 10-year-old is very musical, and she said, just a few weeks ago, I don't know how I could live without music.
Oh, that's beautiful.
She takes piano lessons but won't practice.
Yeah.
She takes guitar lessons but won't practice. But she listens, and she's very astute and got a real ear. So we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, completely. And 10 years old is just like, it's such a great moment for music and children. I kind of envy you. It's just like, it's a wonderful thing as the children's experience starts to open up. I don't know what kind of music you were listening to when you were 10, but it was important.
Not what my daughter listens to. I mean, you know, like I listen to, when I'm getting her up in the morning, I'm listening to Doja Cat and
Oh yeah, right,
you know,
of course, yeah.
Taylor Swift and
you're
Justin
dialed into
Bieber
that.
and whoever. I mean, that's who's on the radio.
Yeah.
And she has a clock radio that wakes her up. But you know, that's. Iona's taste has shifted a lot in just, you know, because she pays attention to it, and she's gone from liking real kid stuff to liking kind of preteen stuff, and now she's, even though she's only 10, she's well into the teen stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, everybody progresses faster now than I remember us all doing back in the day.
Yeah, they're exposed to so many more things.
Yeah,
I was just thinking about you listening to Elvis on the radio, as you know, and now there's just so many more. There's so much more available, and same with me. I mean, I guess part of the reason why my musical world opened up is my parents bought me a little transistor radio then.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, I wasn't listening to their music; I was listening to things that I chose.
Same thing happened. I mean, it wasn't only that, because I was aware of the music, you know, from hanging out with my friends and whatever, too. But you know, whenever there was a new Elvis record out, we'd all be off to the record store to pick one up, and you know, my parents rolled their eyes and put up with it. You know,
yeah, it seemed like there was a bigger generation gap when we were children, or when I was a child.
Yeah, well, because there was a break. I think the gap was real. Now there's no gap, because even though there's a huge age difference and an obvious difference in experience and everything, but all the stuff that was fresh when I was young is still around.
Yeah, right.
Nothing goes away because
exactly.
of the internet and because of recording, etc. So, you know, it's all there available if you want to look for it, which is great in one way, but it also seems to want to kind of standardize everything and homogenize everything in a way that I'm not sure is healthy. And
I also wonder if there's it's almost like the reason why we have death is to make room for the new things.
That's, you know, when I was getting ready to do my first album, I mean, I was in the build-up to that.
Yeah.
I had this fantasy that one of my main motivations for wanting to make a record was so that I could forget those songs.
I know what you mean.
And make room for new ones. And of course that was a completely naive.
Yeah. It was the same way. I was like writing a book, and I'm like, oh, nothing better happened to me until it's like published and in libraries, because all the things could just, you know, well, there's one copy of it in your house. It can be destroyed. But I certainly, yeah, you're right. It's funny.
But I mean, with songs, of course, the opposite happens. You put songs on a record, and then everybody wants to hear those songs. You don't get to forget them.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But it's the book was like that a bit. I mean, once it got rolling, and it felt like there was, like we actually had something to say. I mean, I say we because my friend Greg King helped me write this book, and without his help, it would be, a disorganized jumble if it even existed at all. I wrote about 100 pages of stuff, mostly from early memories, or like up through my teen years, and but then when I got to adulthood, I didn't know where to go with it, and all kinds of what ifs arose. Like, what if I name somebody and they don't want to be named?
Right.
What
Well,
if
I was wondering about
what
it,
if I
that exact
reveal
question.
compromising information
Yes,
about somebody who's
completely.
not dead?
Right. Right.
All that
Did
sort
you
of stuff.
talk to people? Like, did you talk to your daughter about like what you were saying?
Nope.
Or
No, I didn't consult with anybody. I just
because that's what happens in
plowed
preaching all the
on.
time. I was like, you use a story from your kid's life, and so I was always really conscious of that element.
After the fact, I was apprehensive. I was like, well, I hope you didn't.
I thought it was
find what
completely
said.
cool. I think you did well. You're a humble person, and I think that really comes out. And you're hardest on yourself of anyone. Do you know what I mean? So you're much more likely to show I don't know, like less flattering details about yourself than about anybody else who's connected to you.
It seemed to me that when you're writing a book like this, that's supposed to be based on your life. I mean, not based on, but a version of your life with with the implications that you've been able to draw from it. The responsibility, or the necessity, is to take responsibility for all the stuff that happens. I mean, you don't. I could have written reams of blameworthy or blame-intensive stuff, that
grievance stuff.
But various people or just critiques of people. But it didn't seem like. I mean, everything's always a two-way street. Everything that happens between people is a back and forth. But my job is to present my part of that back and forth. Yeah. So that's what I did.
It was really. I mentioned it a little bit just before we came on. It was a really powerful reading. Just a lot of those things are things that I lived through too, and I just hadn't thought very much lately about just how seriously involved the American government was in Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Chile. And it was very sobering to be reminded of just how much the School of the Americas, Fort Bennington, all that stuff.
It's I mean, it goes back to the Monroe doctrine, and to the fear of that the fledgling nation had in the beginning. I mean, the fear of being taken over by some European power, which was all the power back then. So all this muscle was flexed, and that led to a whole lot of abuse that hasn't gone away. The muscles, I mean, lots of us still feel that the muscles have to be flexed.
Yeah. I felt so much, just with everything that's happening in Ukraine right now, it made me much more wary of making any strong pronouncements of things when the United States government dropped more bombs on Cambodia, Vietnam, than all of World War II combined, when maybe 1 million people were killed in Iraq. It just made it harder to feel the same moral outrage that I feel like everybody,
It's. I mean, I feel. To me, it just feels totally tragic. There's a sense of outrage for sure. I mean, how dare Putin, etc.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
And his cronies do this.
Yes.
But nobody's guilt-free, and nobody's all good. So it's. But I mean, it's a horrible.
It's a horrible thing.
And I've never been in action in a war.
Yeah.
I've been reasonably close to stuff going on.
Well, that's why I kept thinking about you. I wondered if this brought back memories of Mozambique or Iraq, or because you have been in war zones immediately after hostilities when things hadn't really been peaceful.
Yeah, I mean, Baghdad was when I see the footage from the cities in the Ukraine, it reminds me most of Baghdad, because there were the same rocket holes in buildings and whatever or missile holes that you see in the TV stuff from Ukraine, but that human behavior is something that I think we're stuck with. I wish we weren't, but it struck me the second time I was in Mozambique when the war was over, and we were able to actually travel around and kind of see the countryside. I remember feeling so strongly that war is the default condition of humankind. That we don't we try not to go there. Sometimes we deliberately go there, as we're witnessing now. I don't understand that. I can understand it as a defensive thing, but I don't understand the need to impose yourself by military means on someone else. I don't get that.
One of the things you say in the book
some
is,
people do.
you probably don't remember this, but that wars come from a kind of an absence of connection to the spirit. That's one of the things that you, and so I know it's part of your kind of like theological makeup, even if it might not be, you remember the exact words that you said about it. But.
Well, yeah, and I don't, I mean, that's a phrase that's going to mean something different to everybody.
Yeah, right, right,
So
exactly.
I'm just trying to think of like, how do you translate that?
Yes, totally.
It does stem from pathology within us. It struck me at one point too that we've inherited the genes that sort of go with being both predator and prey at once, and that makes us crazy. Yeah. I think. I spent a lot of time around horses back in the day.
Right, exactly.
And horses are simple mammals. Like they act like aspects of us a lot, but it's all simple. You can
they're
see
more
it
consistent
and transparent in a way.
Yeah.
And they're prey animals, and they know that, and they react to things as from a very, what we would call a paranoid kind of point of view, right? And we have that, but we also have this swaggering bravado that goes with being killers.
Yeah.
And nobody seems to be very good at reconciling those two things, or most of us, most of the time, just kind of ignore it and get on with things, and these processes, the inner processes, just carry on without us paying attention to them, and then burst out in unexpected ways sometimes. But it's that's a tricky one. All that I don't know what to do about it, except try to be as loving as possible.
Yeah. You write about landmines in the book, and maybe that is like one place where like you can make a start on it. Do you mean you may not be able to ban all war or every weapon, but what an extraordinary thing if we could ban one kind of weapon that just causes so much.
And a lot of countries did.
Yeah.
And a few big ones didn't.
I know. I'm still like, it breaks my heart. I'm just like, we've got to do something about this.
In general, the countries that are making money off those things don't want to ban them, and the countries that have the biggest stocks of them don't want to ban them, and there's other concerns, of course, but all the little the petty warlords who are the main users of child soldiers and all that. I mean, landmines are a great weapon for them, and it'll be very hard to ever get rid of them completely because of that. as long as somebody's making them and putting them out there,
Right.
which they
Yeah,
are.
because I can't imagine a petty warlord making their own, like making millions of landmines themselves. Do you know what I mean? It's just like
Yeah.
you depend on this connection.
Well, they
to
say, I mean, some of the most the simplest landmines are dead simple
Yeah,
things. I mean, you
right.
can make them. It's a wooden box
Right,
with,
exactly, a
with
spring on it
explosives
and
in it. I mean,
yeah.
and a trigger, and it's those are, they were popular in Vietnam on the Vietnamese side because they were easy to make and easy to deploy.
Yeah.
They're also easier to detect than the very high tech new ones, but yeah, I mean. It's General Romeo Dallaire, who's the Canadian general that was in charge of the UN forces in Rwanda, who wrote a really great book called Shake Hands with the Devil about his experiences there, and he was devastated by what happened in Rwanda. He doesn't get a very good treatment in the movie in Hotel Rwanda.
Yeah, right,
There's a character,
yeah, based on him.
I forget who plays him, but he's not portrayed in a very good light. But he's a better person than that movie would indicate, and he talks about weapon systems, and he's very committed now and has been ever since then to confronting the phenomenon of child soldiers, and he thinks of them as a weapons system. It's so the landmines are part of that same. The mentality that you can create a weapon system out of available material,
Right.
Which is, I mean, if you were forced to defend yourself against an alien force from out there somewhere,
Yeah.
you'd want to take advantage of. But in the world, we don't need that anymore. If we ever did, and I don't think we really ever did. It's for the world to move forward, we've got to. We've got to rein all that stuff in.
Yeah. In your book, you write a little bit about the transformation of how you you began to become more of an activist. I wonder if, you have anything to say about just how you began to make that transformation, and how does it look different now than when you first started becoming aware of these things and started wanting to include them in your music?
Well, again, it's going to be a personal sort of answer, which I guess is what you want. Otherwise, why me? But in the beginning, it felt like a moral obligation, and there was an attraction to that. It wasn't just a sense of obligation, but
Yeah.
it was both an exciting period of discovery, and a sense of deepening understanding of how the world works, and a moral duty that went with that deepening understanding to do something about it and say something about it. And for me, saying is mostly what I do.
Right,
I mean,
right.
it's not. I don't.
Make
I can't go
widgets.
out in the woods and
Yeah.
teach people to grow crops or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I can mouth off about stuff, and so I do. but as I've gotten older, the pendulum has kind of swung back in a more spiritual direction, and I mean, there's no real distinction there, because the minute you talk about something that involves groups of people, or even more than one person, you enter into politics, or you
Right,
bring
completely.
politics into the picture.
Yeah.
So, there's no hard lines there, but just my own orientation has sort of been less around what people would call activism, and more like the kind of introspection there was in my stuff that a lot in the 70s.
Yeah.
But I think from the perspective of someone who's been through all that other stuff
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean, I've got a bunch of new songs. Maybe next fall we'll get to record them and see what impact that has, if any, on people.
Yeah, I have two questions that I wanted to ask earlier, but I just didn't get to them. One is just how do you see the period of your life, your whole songwriting life? Like, do you see them like, oh, this was the stage when I was this, and this is the stage when I developed to this, or this is another stage? Like, is there a way that you conceptualize it in that way, or?
It weirdly breaks down into decades.
Yeah.
And there's no I don't know why it should, but there was a characteristic kind of sound that I had in the 70s that changed in the 80s, and then it changed again in the 90s, and the 2000s, it continues to shift, So yeah, I'm not the best one to characterize those changes or analyze them or anything, because I'm in it. But I can see that there are those things, and my own sense is that I've been I've accepted the invitations that have come, as much as I have understood how to do that.
Yes.
So, I mean, that sometimes involves relationships. It sometimes involves changes of where I live, or of what I'm reading, or any number of things. And I hope to continue to be receptive to those kinds of promptings and invitations. But that's really what I see when I look back over the arc of my life. It's just that, I'm sitting there in music school and I'm going, well, I'm pretty bored with this, but I'm learning something. I'm learning stuff. I'm just not very good at it. But it was all this turmoil and other feelings that go with being a guy in his late teens, and it just became very clear to me, you got to drop out of music school and you got to go play guitar and do whatever you're going to do, but we don't know what that is, but you're going to go do that.
Yeah.
And that's the earliest one of those things that I'm aware of.
Right.
And that thing has continued ever since. It's like this, this relationship needs to be nurtured and get going, and this other relationship needs to end. And
you go to Mozambique and you say yes.
Well, you get I mean, those are simple things. You get invited to go places. I got invited to go to Central America by Oxfam because they wanted somebody with a public profile, to kind of go and see what they were doing there and talk about it.
Right.
But I wanted to go there because I wanted to see what was going on there, and they provided the means. So, whose idea was that? It's like I look upward when I say that.
Exactly.
So it's been a process of saying yes, sometimes in ignorance, sometimes deliberately, mostly not deliberately, mostly just letting it happen. But not refusing something new just because it's new.
Yeah, I love that. So how is your spiritual life these days? And just in the same way that you had like a life that's had these different seasons in your music, has there been kind of like a corresponding or parallel seasons in your spiritual life?
Yeah, again, different manifestations of that, but for the longest time, between the early 80s, let's say, and 4 or 5 years ago, I rarely set foot in a church. I'd been a pretty consistent churchgoer from maybe the early 70s on, but when I moved I'd been based in Ottawa most of that time, and when I moved to Toronto and got divorced, and life changed, and I never found a church that I felt connected to.
Yeah.
And after a while, I just stopped thinking of myself as somebody who went to church. But then a few years back, my wife got embarked on this great work of spiritual understanding as a result of the death of a friend of ours. And she discovered San Francisco Lighthouse Church, and eventually convinced me to go. At first, I'm not a church-going guy anymore. I've been there, did that. It's not for me. Well, you got to come. The music's really good, and you'll like the pastor. So finally, she persuaded me, and I went, and I walk in this place. I mean, I haven't been physically in the place now for a couple of years, but this is going back a ways. But I walk in there, nobody knows who I am. I don't know who anybody is. But the room was just saturated with love.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Take note here. This is one of those moments.
Yeah.
You're back.
Yeah.
You know? So, and I've been back ever since there. So that's a simple kind of more external example of this kind of thing happening. And it's, I mentioned earlier the dream work that I do, and that's been a big part of it too. I feel like I was given the connection with that teacher, and that although at times I have to struggle to kind of reconcile the kinds of imagery or the kinds of direction of thinking that invites with what I understand to be my Christian faith. But in the end, it's like, well, you know, God, you gave me this thing, so I'm going to go with it, you know, unless you tell me not to.
Yeah.
And so far, he's been encouraging in that way. So, and it continues. I don't know. I mean, I went from being very inward directed in the 70s to, and one of the things, when the exterior life changed, there was an invitation there that was very clear. It was like, okay, well, you spent all this time looking at yourself, now it's time to look at other people. Yeah. You're supposed to love them, you better find out who they are.
Yeah.
And so I became a much more social individual and kind of embraced urban life in a way that I never had. And that led to, you know, various distractions and stumbles and whatnot, but it was a part of the process.
Yeah.
I think that somebody asked me the other day, you know, I can't remember exactly what the question was now, but you know, how to deal, what you could expect. Maybe it had to do with advice for young people or something, young musicians starting up, which I can't really offer because they're working in a milieu that's nothing like the one I came up in. But I, you know, I remember saying, like, well, you know, if you think things are, you know, you're stuck because things are a certain way, just wait 10 years and it'll all be different, you know. But exactly. I can say that at 76. Yeah. You know, at 26 I wouldn't have.
Yeah,
sorry,
right.
I just hit the microphone there. But at 26 I wouldn't have appreciated that piece of advice. But I mean, from this perspective, it's true. It's like nothing stays the same. Everything, human nature stays the same, alas. Yeah. But the rest of all the fashion stuff, all the externals are constantly in flux.
Oh yeah, completely. You're so right about even the technologies are changing us. It's one of the regular questions I ask people is just, you know, about the internet and how what direction is it leading us? Because it's almost like the printing press was just invented yesterday, and we still aren't really even sure how to use it yet. And who would ever imagine, like, you'd go to war and the president of the country where the war is talking to every major parliament in the United States, in the world. Do you mean, it's just like, how strange is that? Like, when in human history has ever something like that happened? And yet we kind of take it for granted all of a sudden.
The parallel's been, or the point's been made lots of times, but our technology has brought us to a kind of universality of human experience that we haven't had since we were all cave people.
Together, you know? Exactly. In
you know,
one
we all had
continent.
the same culture, like in the
Exactly,
beginning, right? You know, worshipped mountains of skulls and made things out of stones, and now we're back, all being the same again, except we still have our fractiousness and you know, our pathologies.
Yeah. But the normal way we usually do this is we have a big auditorium filled with people.
Right.
So they're not here, alas, but they are sending us in questions.
Oh yeah.
So here's one of the questions. Apart from the mundane miracle of life itself, quote unquote mundane miracle of life itself, have you witnessed or experienced what you might classify as a miracle, something that defies material explanation? In Rumors of Glory, you recount 2 occasions of feeling a presence. Have there been other occurrences that have stood out? That's a great question. Our listeners and viewers.
It is. That requires some thinking. I mean, miracles in the kind of the magical sense. Not so much. I mean, I've seen things that sort of defied explanation, but they didn't seem necessarily divine always. Sometimes they're quite the opposite, actually. But I mean, that sense of presence has come. It comes in different ways. I have not been as aware of a person in the way that I talk about in the book, but there have been times when I've been praying or worshiping with other people sometimes, where there'll be a sense of that presence. It's pretty subjective, though. I mean, I don't think somebody looking on would go, "Ooh, a miracle just happened," but I feel that I've been touched. And in one case, because I long for connection. You talked about connection. I mean, to me, that's the whole thing. Our connection with the divine is the whole point of being here.
Yeah.
And I long for a clutter-free connection.
Yeah.
And I seldom experience that. But once in a while, so I'm sitting there at the breakfast table, and I was by myself, but saying, God could really use some indication of your presence right now. And I forget the exact words that I used, but this sense of kind of warm honey pouring down over me just came, and it wasn't a hallucination. I mean, I didn't think I was anywhere else, or anyone else or anything like that, but it was just like this touch. It was so loving and so reassuring and so like, yeah, it's okay, and it really, the physical sensation was as if this viscous material, warm material was pouring down over me, and it lasted a few minutes and went away.
Yeah, that's what happened to Martin Luther King. I mean, like the darkest moment, he was sitting at the kitchen table and had an experience like that, and it had fruit. It bore fruit. It gave him comfort and courage in a moment when he really needed it.
I put it in a song, but so maybe it'll mean something to someone else. But it's those things. Those kinds of things are not frequent particularly, but happen often enough to kind of keep reminding me that I'm not just fantasizing all this stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another question. When I go to your shows, I'm struck by how you appear powerfully connected to your songs as you're performing them. I'm curious if in those moments your mind is taken back to the feelings and experiences you had when you composed the songs, or when you lived what you wrote about.
That's a good question too, and it's very much the case that.
It's like time travel. You start the song.
I mean, in a certain way, like revisiting old photographs or something, but more intense than I would expect that to be. But yeah, I do definitely. I mean, I hate singing if I had a rocket launcher, for instance, because I have to go there whenever I'm singing it, and I don't like being there at all. Yeah. But and of course the same is correspondingly true of the more joyful songs, or the any other kind of song in its own way. So I mean, that's part of the job. In a way, it's not. It's. I feel like it's a gift that I'm able to do that at all, but it is part of the gig. I mean, you get people's money and you get up on stage. You got to give them a good show, and giving them a good show means being into what you're doing, and fully involved.
Yeah, and it's great that you still have that experience of it. I mean, one of the things that I loved about the book was just you talking about how, like, you could kind of dial it in now. I mean, you know all the songs. You could just keep doing the same thing that you were doing before. But there is a part of you that wants to progress, like to get to the new thing, to invite the spirit in the way that it's speaking to you now, to continue to be something new.
Yeah, it doesn't work to just go over old. To do it by rote, it is pretty meaningless, really.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that when I'm practicing, I do that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I wouldn't want to be doing that in a shared space.
Yeah, for
know.
people who came to make a connection, like you
Yeah.
said. Okay, so here's that last question. I know who wrote that too. I wrote that in there. We have a songwriter here who's a member of the congregation who I love to talk to him about just like the craft of his work. Okay, at the end of the documentary Pacing the Cage, you were asked about the prospect for the human race. You replied, "We're fucked." Do you still feel that way?
Pretty much, yeah.
Are we still in
In a
the
nutshell.
falling dark? Where do you find the imagination for hope?
Well, you know, I throw myself on the mercy of God, basically. You know, that's because I don't see a human solution. I mean, that's my more politically involved brother, one of my brothers, took me to task for the line in Gavin's Woodpile where it said, this is a song for people who weren't tuned in back then from the mid-'70s. You know, it's easy to see there's no human answer here.
Right.
And I felt that way then, I still feel that way, although in between I might have flirted with the notion that we might be able to fix things, but I don't really think so. I think we have to trust. Trust is everything. If you, although of course you can trust the wrong things.
Yeah.
So take this, you know, in that light, but I think we need to get our egos out of the way and open ourselves to, for me, to God, okay? Other people may define it in different ways. And there's a very high, I can't think of the right words, but it's very easy to be distracted or to be welcoming the wrong thing. You can be deluded. You can think your ego's out of the way when it's way not, which happens to us all a lot. And those are terrible pitfalls, and we end up following all the wrong things if we go there. So discernment, I guess, is the word that comes to mind that we need to apply to that sense of trust. It's not skepticism. Discernment's a different thing. It's like, where is this really coming from? Yeah. And we have to, you know, I guess, ask for guidance with respect to that.
You know, that's funny because this is exactly right to the question for me that's like most personal for me, for me, not for everybody. But just like, how can like preaching or sermons help? Like what like as somebody who hears sermons or can imagine you from your own context, what your own, like, I don't know, sermons of your music are, like what helps people in preaching?
Different things. I mean, as the recipient of, you know, being on the other end of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I see what you guys do as something very similar to what I do.
Yeah, me too.
It's a performance. You don't want to get up there and stutter and mess it up.
Yeah.
But if you do, then you hope that a truth comes through that too.
Exactly.
So the performance invites or requires a degree of vulnerability and spontaneity, no matter how prepared you are. And I try to get really prepared. I practice a lot, and I try to not screw it up. but sometimes you do. But you don't know what effect you're going to have on the people out there. And I don't know that about the people that hear me, and you don't know it about the people who hear you. But as one of the people who hears preachers preach, it hits the same place that music does when it works, and by works, that it's not just about the performance of the preacher; it's also about how receptive I am and the vibe in the room, even, you know. But so it's a thing that exists in the moment, and the value of it comes from its existence in the moment. You take away stuff that lasts, you know. But when it really hits, I mean, to be in a congregation where people start shouting back at the
Right,
pastor, you know, like that's, I've never experienced that, you know, previously, but
Right.
that happens now and then. Now and it's like, yeah, okay, that's somebody being touched.
Yeah.
And I feel it. I mean, I wasn't raised to shout back at the pastor, but I feel it, and it's a great feeling when you get that. It's like, yeah, this is truth. This is truth that I can perceive and absorb and take in.
Yeah.
So, you know, and sometimes it's just the sharing of space. Like, here's somebody who cares.
Yeah.
It might only be that, which is a pretty big thing too.
Yeah, yeah. There are definitely moments, you know, in your book where I felt that. I felt like the Spirit was active. Whatever you intended, there was something that was moving in me, and I'm really grateful. I'm grateful. It's hard to believe that our time is actually at a close. But it's been very good to have you here.
Well, we can thank everybody for hanging in.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah, and so you'll be leaving on tour in around Easter, after Easter.
Just before. The first show is right after Easter. It's
Yeah.
in Peterborough, Ontario.
Oh,
and
great.
We
Gosh,
have a
that's
couple of
great
weeks
going
worth
up
of
there.
stuff to do in Ontario, and then there's another brief break, and then in May we do some more Western U.S. stuff.
Super.
So
Super. Well, good. I can't wait to see you next. All right. Please join me on Wednesday, April 6th, when my guest will be educator Daniel Heichman, Executive Director of the National Association of Episcopal Schools. We'll be talking about what schools can teach us about religious life. We rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. You can give to gracecathedral.org or by texting THINK, T-H-I-N-K, to 76278. And again, thanks so much, Bruce, for being our guest today and making this part of your time. Your witness was very powerful and helpful for us.
well, thank you for saying that, and thanks for having me. It's been
Yeah.
nice to talk with you.
Definitely. Good night, everyone.